We're joined now in studio by U.S. Ambassador Michael Ranneberger. We want to talk about the inauguration, want to talk about Martin Luther King, and about Kenya as well. Thank you so much for joining us.
Good to see you.
Thank you. Let's begin with Martin Luther King, because that was further back than all this. Let's talk about the civil rights movement, and I think his birthday was January 15th.
Yes.
Today is Dr. Martin Luther King Day. Is it today or tomorrow in the
It's
U.S.?
Tomorrow
in the U.S. Thank you. So the 19th.
Yeah.
So where were you during the time of the civil rights movement? Do you remember that time? Did it impact?
You know, when the civil rights movement was happening, when it all emerged, of course, was during the 1950s. 1954 was the famous Brown versus Board of Education decision by the Supreme Court, which outlawed discrimination in education.
Right.
And at that time, I was really too young to remember it. But as the movement gained steam during the 1960s, of course, I was in grade school at the time. I was very much aware of it, of course. I wasn't marching in the streets, of course. I was too young to be doing that. But I remember, of course, vividly when I was older, the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King in 1968.
What were your thoughts at that time? Did you feel something in the air changing? Was it a vibrant time for the country?
Yeah. Well, you know, 1968 was a sort of a very difficult year for the U.S. because Dr. Martin Luther King was assassinated, and some people may remember that the presidential candidate, Robert Kennedy, was also killed. So it was a very tragic period. It really put our country into crisis. And as I point out to people, that was 100 years after the Civil War that was fought, of course, to end slavery in the United States. So 100 years later, we were still in the midst of a civil rights crisis, if you will. And of course, American cities erupted into riots at that time, so it was a very grim period.
And of course, Dr. King stood for non-violent action,
yes.
and you know, would have been horrified at all that. But he said then he had a dream, and he said, you know, I believe this will come to fruition.
Yes.
And it seems to have happened.
It seems to have happened. And, you know, if you go back and read his speech, I Have a Dream, which was delivered in August 1963, just, by the way, a couple months before John F. Kennedy was assassinated.
Right.
So it was really I would say, a historically changing speech. I mean, it really changed the face of America. I think it dramatized for white Americans what was at stake as well as black Americans. It electrified the country with the rhetoric. And he basically said, and I have it here, I was even going to read part of it, but he said essentially, I have a dream that all Americans will be equal, that my children and their children's children will be able to live in a way that really honors the principles of the Constitution of the United States.
Right.
And I think today we are seeing that dream is being fulfilled. But you know, it's always going to be a work in progress. You know, I've said this so many times, Judy, democracy, whether it's civil rights or, you know, the role of women or young people, it's always a work in progress. You know, that dream is never completely realized. It's always going to be, you know, an expectation to try to promote true equality in our country for all people in our country. But obviously, if you look at the election of President-elect Obama, that's a major step forward, without question, because he won on the basis of ideas and values. Not on the basis of race, and so that's a huge step forward for our country.
In a country where we're still dealing with, you know, basically a majority who vote based on tribe, I think there's a clear understanding of what the Obama victory means in terms of breaking the barriers and saying, you know, this is a step ahead. The inauguration on Tuesday, of course, a really big day in D.C. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, in anticipation of a day that I think will electrify the United States and the American people, and hopefully electrify and inspire the world as well. You know, the United States is still obviously a force for good in the world. Despite our economic problems, we're still the largest economy in the world. We will come out of all of this and emerge stronger. And I think what we will see with the President-elect's speech, if I can be so bold as to prove, he will seek to inspire Americans and the world that America is committed to democratic values, to values of freedom and promoting human rights in the world, and to getting our own house in order. and resolving the economic crisis.
I think earlier this week or the past week, George Bush gave a press conference and clearly said some mistakes have been made. I think clearly the war in Iraq, weapons of mass destruction, Abu Ghraib was brought up. But even now, looking at the Gaza crisis, clearly his administration is coming in at a very difficult time, and you've touched on their economic crisis. I won't push you on what the outcome is likely to be. I just, I know it would be impossible for you to try to picture what his administration will actually roll out over the next few weeks. But let's take it back to the local perspective. Yes. And we're asking people tonight on this show, does the government have the guts to prosecute people, among them maybe even ministers, who are said to be behind the maize and oil scandals? If you haven't sent your thoughts, send them now. 2442 is the number. What is your thought on this? And you said democracy is a process. We now have a coalition government. Problem is maybe that while one faction was eating from the cake before, it looks like it may well be all of them having a piece of the pie. I don't know. From your perspective as a diplomat, what are your thoughts?
Well, look, I want to take it back to the U.S. first. I think the election of Barack Obama and the fact that our system works so smoothly testifies to the importance of strong institutions, strong values, and the rule of law in a democratic society. And that's what's applicable to Kenya. The fact, and as you said, of course, the fact that people didn't vote on the basis of race or ethnic affiliation. And if you look at Kenya today, I think we have to step back from the headlines just for a second and look at how far this country has come. Right. And I've said it before, and I'm going to say it again, I'm optimistic about the future of this country. And the reason being...
I remember you saying that to me in the middle of the crisis.
And I said it would be resolved.
Yes. Well, there we go.
But if you look at what has happened since 2002, there has been progress, believe it or not. New laws have been passed, new regulations have been put in place, some officials have been removed during Kibaki's first term for alleged corruption and this sort of thing. What is at stake now with the formation of the coalition government is fundamental sweeping change. This coalition government came into office with a commitment to fundamentally change the country. And that means first and foremost ending the culture of impunity. And so people have a right to expect even more than was achieved during Kibaki's first term. They have a right to expect a lot. And so when people see these corruption scandals day after day, which is a testament, by the way, to the free media and to all of the media that are operating to expose these, people are understandably dismayed. And they say, what is going on? Well, what's going on, Judy, is that corruption has been a problem in this country for 4.5 decades. That is not going to change overnight. The question is, will this coalition government truly investigate it, hold people accountable, and remove people who are responsible? And yes, I am cautiously optimistic that that will happen. I'll tell you one reason I am. First of all, I do believe that President Kibaki and Prime Minister Odinga are committed to fundamental change. I think they realize, yes, they're part of the older generation and all of that, but I think they realize that what happened in Kenya was a watershed, and that there has to be real change to prevent something like that from happening again. So I think they're committed to it. But the other reason I believe there'll be action is because I think the Kenyan people will insist on it. I think the Kenyan people have gotten to the point where they're looking at what's going on in Kenya, and they're saying, we're not going to go back. We're not going to go back to the old days. We are going to insist on what our leaders said. We're actually going to hold them to what they said, which is change. And the reform agenda, Judy, that's out there, constitutional change, electoral reform, and the special tribunal, that's just part of a larger agenda for change in the country. It's not going to be an easy process, obviously, when vested interests and the interests of important people are at stake.
Right.
Obviously, that's going to be a difficult process. But I also want to say this, and it's important. Despite all the speculation in the press and all of that, the fact of the matter is that, in fact, in a democracy, people are innocent until proven guilty. So, as hard as it is, I know many people in my country, in your country, would love just to throw people in jail when they're assumed to be
There's
guilty.
due process.
But there's due
Yes.
process, and it's got to be respected.
It's been a pleasure to have you. Thank you. It's always
good to see you.
It's always good to hear
Good to see
you
you.
know, a positive point of view,
Yeah.
and hope that, you know, certainly we are moving forward.
Positive,
Albeit slowly.
positive but realistic.
Right.